The courtroom was buzzing with tension before Pam Bondi even entered. Cameras had already been rolling for several minutes, catching murmurs from both legal teams and the scattered chatter among journalists and spectators. Pam walked in calmly, dressed in a sharp navy blue suit, carrying only a small folder. She didn't bring notes. She never needed them. As Florida's former Attorney General, she'd been in her share of high-stakes legal battles, but something about today felt different. Too many eyes. Too much silence before the storm. At the front of the courtroom sat Judge Edward Chen, leaning back with a smirk that hadn't faded since he first took the bench that morning. His reputation for being sharp-tongued, and even sharper with attorneys he didn't favor, was well known. But today, his condescension felt pointed. Pam approached the podium. "Ms. Bondi," Judge Chen said dryly, "if this is another one of your rehearsed media stunts, I suggest we save the court's time." The audience gave a few uncomfortable laughs. Pam didn't blink. "I assume you've read the motion." Judge Chen rolled his eyes. "Barely. Frankly, the claims seem beneath this courtroom's attention. Unless you've got a miracle buried in that folder." Another ripple of laughter followed from the gallery. Pam paused, slowly opened the folder, and looked up. "I didn't bring a miracle, Your Honor. I brought your signature." The room hushed. Judge Chen blinked. "Excuse me." Pam held up a single document, carefully unfolded. "This is a real estate contract you signed 5 months ago. With a party that directly benefits from this case's outcome." The courtroom froze. Even the clerk stopped typing. Judge Chen's grin vanished. Judge Chen leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as Pam held the document higher for the court to see. "That's irrelevant," he snapped. "You're grasping at straws, Ms. Bondi." Pam took a step closer, her voice unwavering. "On the contrary, Your Honor. It's highly relevant. You entered into a private agreement with Horizon Equity Holdings, one of the primary stakeholders in the policy dispute before this court." Gasps echoed from the gallery. Even a reporter's pen audibly slipped from her hand. Chen's face tightened. "Watch your tone." But Pam wasn't backing down. She laid the document on the table in front of her and gestured to the clerk. "For the record, this signature matches others in verified court filings, including your disclosure forms, which, interestingly, omitted any mention of this deal." A murmur rippled across the room. Judge Chen cleared his throat. "That was a routine investment. I've recused myself from unrelated matters involving Horizon." Pam turned to face him fully. "With respect, Judge Chen, this isn't an unrelated matter. Horizon stands to benefit directly from any ruling on this motion. And your failure to disclose your recent financial involvement compromises the integrity of these proceedings." Silence fell. Then, unexpectedly, Judge Chen laughed. "I've presided over this bench for more than a decade, Ms. Bondi," he said with a sneer. "You think you're the first attorney to throw wild accusations in this courtroom?" Pam gave a small nod, then tapped the folder once more. "No, Your Honor. But I may be the first to bring notarized financial records, wire transfer confirmations, and 3 sworn affidavits from Horizon employees who were instructed to keep quiet about the judge." The courtroom collectively inhaled. And for the first time, Judge Chen didn't have a response. Judge Chen's fingers twitched on the bench. He opened his mouth, then closed it. The confidence head worn like armor was cracking under the weight of the evidence laid bare before him. Pam stepped aside slightly, gesturing toward the gallery. "Your Honor, 3 of those Horizon employees are present today. They're prepared to testify under oath." The judge's gaze darted toward the side of the room, where 3 individuals, 2 men in suits and a woman in a conservative blouse, sat rigidly. One of them gave a slow nod. Judge Chen looked to the bailiff. "Clear the gallery." Pam raised a hand. "With all due respect, Your Honor, any move to silence this hearing could be interpreted as an obstruction." I've already submitted copies of this evidence to the Ethics Oversight Committee and to the state's Judicial Review Board. Now there were audible gasps. A few phones in the gallery were quickly tucked away, some already had footage. Judge Chen's tone shifted, more measured now. This isn't how courtroom procedure works, Ms. Bondi. If you had concerns, they should have been filed through the proper channels. They were, Pam interrupted calmly. 2 weeks ago. No response. Which is why I filed an emergency motion this morning and why the federal oversight representative is en route. The double doors to the courtroom opened behind her. Everyone turned. A man in a black suit and gold DOJ badge stepped in quietly, flanked by 2 federal marshals. Pam stepped back from the podium. Right on time, she said softly. Judge Chen looked like the ground had just tilted beneath him. The federal agent walked briskly toward the bench, flashing credentials without saying a word. The 2 marshals split off, one standing near the gallery doors, the other positioning himself by the clerk's desk. Judge Chen stood, visibly rattled. This is highly irregular, the agent cut him off with professional calm. Judge Edward Chen, we are here pursuant to an active investigation regarding judicial misconduct and undeclared financial entanglements. You are not under arrest at this time, but you are required to immediately recuse yourself from these proceedings. Gasps broke out again. Pam remained still, eyes forward, letting the silence hang. Chen tried to compose himself, his voice strained. This is outrageous. Based on what? A few papers brought in by a grandstanding former attorney general. The agent calmly placed a sealed envelope on the bench. This packet includes corroborated testimony, account records, and transaction data, cross-referenced and verified by federal auditors. The moment you signed that deal, Your Honor, you crossed a line. Pam turned slightly, her voice steady but sharp. The public deserves better than quiet arrangements behind closed doors. Judges can't pick winners from the bench for their own benefit. Judge Chen stared at the envelope like it might catch fire. The courtroom was dead silent. Every word echoed with finality. The agent added, a temporary replacement has already been assigned. You'll be escorted to your chambers until formal review procedures begin. Judge Chen looked down, the color draining from his face. He opened his mouth but no words came. Finally, he sank back into his chair, motionless. The agent nodded toward the marshals. Without a word, they approached the bench. As the marshals reached the bench, Judge Chen stood stiffly. He didn't protest. He didn't look at the gallery. He just glanced once, briefly, at Pam Bondi, as if trying to read how far ahead she'd been playing this game. But Pam gave him nothing. No smile. No satisfaction. Just professional silence. The agent turned to address the courtroom. This proceeding will be paused until an alternate judge is seated. Any attempts to tamper with evidence or intimidate witnesses will be treated as obstruction. You are all advised to remain available for further inquiry. The marshals gently motioned Judge Chen toward the side exit. Cameras caught the exact moment he disappeared behind the doors, shoulders slumped, lips pressed into a thin, grim line. As the doors shut, murmurs erupted. Pam finally took a breath and turned to retrieve her folder. One reporter called out, Ms. Bondi, did you know this would happen today? She paused for just a second, then answered without turning. I didn't come here to watch him fall. I came to make sure no one else had to. With that, she walked out of the courtroom, leaving behind not just a stunned audience, but the beginning of what would become one of the most talked about judicial ethics scandals in recent memory. The news broke within the hour. Federal marshals escort Judge Edward Chen from courtroom following conflict of interest bombshell. Pam Bondi uncovers secret deal tied to active case. Judicial oversight launches immediate probe. By sunset, every major network was airing footage from the courtroom. Clips of Pam Bondi standing firm, the judge's visible discomfort, and the moment the marshals stepped forward played in an endless loop. Social media exploded. Hashtags like #ChenConflict, hashtag Bondi exposes, and hashtag judicial integrity began trending globally. The Judicial Review Board released a short statement confirming that Judge Chen had been placed on immediate administrative leave pending a full investigation. Meanwhile, Horizon Equity Holdings released a carefully worded press release denying wrongdoing, but the damage had already been done. Their stock plummeted 12% overnight. Pam Bondi, for her part, stayed quiet. She declined interviews for 2 days. Then, finally, she held a brief press conference outside the courthouse. Cameras flashed as she stepped to the podium. Our legal system works only when it's held accountable. What happened this week wasn't about headlines. It was about defending the principle that no one, is above transparency, especially those trusted to interpret the law. She took no questions. Just walked away, her job done. Back inside the courthouse, the new judge assigned to the case quietly resumed proceedings. But the room still carried the echo of what had unfolded, an unshakable reminder that truth, when brought to light, speaks louder than any gavel. While the public buzzed over the courtroom drama, behind the scenes, deeper questions were stirring. In a quiet office inside the Department of Justice, 2 investigators reviewed the digital trail that led to Judge Chen's undoing. They hadn't just received Bondi's evidence, they'd been monitoring financial activity for months. Pam's bold move had simply forced everything into daylight. Looks like Bondi did more than just stir the pot, one agent said, flipping through a sealed report. She cracked the whole system open. The second agent nodded. This wasn't just one bad ruling. It's the tip of something bigger. That, something bigger, referred to Horizon Equity's web of influence, lobbyists, judicial donations, and private dinners involving multiple state officials. With Chen exposed, more names were now under scrutiny. Meanwhile, in a private law office across town, Pam Bondi met with 2 former colleagues, trusted allies who had helped quietly collect evidence over the past 6 months. They spoke little. Just reviewed the list of judges, lobbyists, and shadow contracts that hadn't yet come to light. This was never about just one courtroom, Pam said, her tone low but resolute. It's about how many doors have been closed to justice, because someone with power paid to keep them shut. She slid a folder to the center of the table. This was Chen, she said. Next one's bigger. And with that, the real work began. The next name on Pam Bondi's list wasn't a judge, it was a state regulatory commissioner. Known publicly for promoting business-friendly reforms, Commissioner Alan Rusk had quietly approved over a dozen controversial fast-tracked permits, many of them traced back to shell subsidiaries of Horizon Equity Holdings. To the average observer, the transactions looked routine. But Pam's team had found the thread that connected them, a shadow firm registered under a different name but sharing a legal address with one of Chen's real estate partners. As she stared at the documents, Pam knew what came next wouldn't be as simple as courtroom exposure. This wasn't just about law, it was about influence. They couldn't just walk into another hearing and drop a folder. Rusk had friends in every agency, every backroom. The kind who erased trails, who made witnesses vanish under legal pressure or NDA silences. But Pam had something else, leverage. One of Horizon's former financial analysts had flipped. Quietly. Willingly. And he'd brought an external hard drive. Encrypted. 6 layers deep. What he claimed was on it could unravel years of deals, names, and internal communications, including emails that tied Rusk, Chen, and others to a shared off-book strategy labeled, Soft Pressure Initiative. Pam looked at her team. We're going to need federal cybersecurity. And we do this one off the record. No leaks. Not yet. They nodded. They'd already shaken a courtroom. Now, they were going after a network. 2 days later, in a dimly lit government lab on the edge of D.C., a cybersecurity team was hard at work decrypting the hard drive. The analyst who handed it over, young, pale, and visibly nervous, paced behind a pane of reinforced glass, sipping from a trembling coffee cup. Pam stood in the observation room with a federal investigator from the Financial Crimes Division. Neither spoke as the screen filled with streams of code slowly unfolding into legible files. And then, they hit it. Internal memo, soft pressure initiative, judicial streamlining targets. Pam stepped closer to the glass. The document listed names. Judges. Commissioners. Consultants. Dozens of them. Next to each was a numerical score, compliant, persuadable, or hostile. There were notes in bullet points: E. Chen, cooperative, useful in real estate zoning delays. A. Rusk, greenlit 3 dummy permits without hearing. Secure. Flag Bondi, publicly hostile. Watch for movement. Pam's jaw clenched. They were tracking me, she said under her breath. More files followed, wire transfers to third-party lobby firms, encrypted communications between Horizon executives and government liaisons, and a long string of emails suggesting bribes disguised as consulting fees. The financial investigator beside her gave a low whistle. You just walked into something massive. Pam nodded slowly. No. We just cracked it. Behind them, one of the techs looked up from the terminal. There's more, he said. A lot more. Within 72 hours, the investigation went from classified to unstoppable. Federal prosecutors launched a multi-agency task force, quietly issuing subpoenas and sealing evidence to prevent tampering. The scope had grown beyond Judge Chen or Commissioner Rusk. This was a national scandal now. Lobbyists, corporate lawyers, financial officers, some of the most trusted public names, were suddenly on a collision course with the justice system. And at the center of it all stood Pam Bondi. In a secured briefing room, she addressed senior DOJ officials. This wasn't just corruption, she said. It was strategy. A whole system designed to suppress oversight, manipulate legal outcomes, and undermine public trust from within. The lead prosecutor looked up from a thick folder. And it would have stayed buried if you hadn't forced it out in open court. Pam nodded, her expression steady. It was never about spectacle. I just gave them the match. They already built the fire. By the end of the month, Judge Edward Chen had resigned, facing a formal indictment. Commissioner Rusk was arrested and charged with multiple counts of fraud and abuse of office. Horizon Equity Holdings was under full federal investigation, its assets frozen pending further review. And several high-level officials from multiple states quietly stepped down before their names hit the press. Pam returned home one evening, exhausted but resolute. She glanced at the folder on her kitchen table, the one with the next name on the list. She didn't open it. Not yet. For now, the truth had spoken. And it wasn't done speaking. Though headlines had quieted and the public assumed the worst was over, Pam Bondi knew better. In the weeks that followed, she received a series of anonymous emails. No names. Just attachments, redacted memos, meeting schedules, and internal documents from a consultancy firm linked to multiple federal contracts. The subject line of the final email simply read, "The Whisper Network." Pam called a private meeting with 2 trusted former federal agents who had assisted her during the Chen ordeal. "The Whisper Network," one of them muttered, flipping through the documents. "We always thought it was a rumor." But the documents told a different story, an informal alliance, off the books, of corporate legal teams, former regulators, and policy advisors who quietly shaped judicial decisions by influencing appointments and pressuring judges behind the scenes. The network had no official name. No website. But it had influence. Real, quiet power. Pam looked at the list. It didn't include names, but initials. Coded references. Meeting locations in airport lounges, closed-door dinners during policy conferences. She sat back. They don't need to break laws, she said. They rewrite them. Her former agents exchanged a look. This could go federal, one said. Pam shook her head. No leaks. Not yet. We follow it. Quietly. Every move, every thread. She picked up the last sheet, handwritten, smudged at the edge. At the bottom was a final warning: you opened the first door. But some of these don't want to be found. Be careful, Bondi. Pam didn't flinch. She placed the file in a separate folder labeled Whisper, closed it, and slid it into her briefcase. This wasn't over. This was only the beginning of something even deeper. It was late when Pam arrived in Manhattan, alone, no entourage, no press. Just a burner phone, a backup recorder, and the Whisper network folder, now marked with red tabs and handwritten notes. The meeting had been set through a blind contact, an insider from within the network itself who requested a single condition: anonymity. She entered a rooftop lounge, dimly lit and nearly empty. A single man sat in the far corner, back to the skyline, a hat pulled low over his brow. "You Bondi?" he asked without looking up. "I am," she said calmly. He motioned to the chair across from him and slid forward a slim USB drive. "What you've seen is surface level. I worked logistics. Schedules. Flights. Nothing illegal on paper. But everything real in impact." Pam took the drive and slipped it into her coat. "Why now?" The man finally looked up, haunted eyes, heavy guilt. "Because they're preparing for something bigger. Court stacking. Agency rotations. Next year's appointments are already decided. Your takedown of Chen. That wasn't a win. It was a warning." Pam leaned forward. "To who?" "To them. That someone's paying attention." The man stood. "If you go further, they'll push back harder. Not through law. Through isolation. Leverage. Personal ruin." He walked away without another word. Pam sat still for a long moment, watching the city lights flicker below. Then she stood. No calls. No declarations. Just quiet resolve. She didn't seek attention. She sought accountability. And now, she had the key to a machine that had gone unchecked for too long. In silence, she left. The fight wasn't over. The game hadn't ended. It had just changed levels.